Hey, beautiful people. This is I Dating Better, and we are back. We are having about to have a wonderful conversation. I'm calling that into existence. Um, I have right now Gulley Grand, also known as James, um, from our Dating Better group. We are going to be talking about a topic that might be kind of controversial for some folks, and even for myself. Maybe I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But I think that, we have to have these conversations. I think it's important that we talk about a multitude of issues, a multitude of topics. And so this is one topic that a lot of people might say is a hot
Is polygamy, right? So we got my brother, Gulley Grand, on the line.
Introduce yourself, Gully.
Peace, everybody. It's G.
And so we are going to be talking about polygamy. Now, I just want to just preface this a little bit. This is a topic that does come up. We're in a dating group, and so there's multiple ways of dating. There's multiple ways of existing and loving on each other, and polygamy has been one of those things that comes up. And I just wanted to just get some open and honest discussion about it. Gully, we converse back and forth times, and so he asked me a very poignant question last night and asked me what my thoughts were on polygamy, and I gave my thoughts, and we're going to talk about it some more, because I think that I want to understand more. And some of the historical context that I think that we need sometimes when we're looking at certain things. We are in a Western society, but we're not that. We're not from that. Basically, we're not Westerners, right? So that it is important that we do examine historically what are some things and help us to put some things into context. So I want you first, Joey, to just explain from your perspective, even from the historical perspective, what is polygamy and what is it all about?
Okay, so polygamy is comprised of two components, which is polygyny, which is a man with multiple women, and polyandry, which is a woman with multiple men. So, from a historical standpoint, what you have mainly has been a man with multiple women. And the reason that existed is because early on, when you're talking about um, not just a hunter-gathering stage, where men oftentimes will lose their lives in hunting because of big game, wild animals, but also wars. So, as a way of holding together the families and not leaving women out there to be by themselves or to raise children by themselves, the women would come together and decide whose family that this woman now will go into. So it's always been about community and preserving the family. And if you think about it and you think about the ways of which a woman who has been left by herself, a woman who is not having her needs met, she is going to find eyes for another woman's husband eventually. You know what I'm saying? And that could cause all kind of issues in the family unit. So instead of getting to that point, the women early on understood that, and they created ways to mitigate issues and strengthen the family. And that's one of the things. And in general, um, there are more women than men in most places. It's not as far off as a lot of people would think, but there are more women than men. And you could also, one of the ways it was put to me is that if you think about it, because a lot of people talk about, well, why can't women do the same thing? And it's like, well, if you put it in a context of family, community building, then you say this. If you said, if tomorrow all men disappeared except for one, how long would it take to repopulate the earth?
Mm-hmm.
And if you take and flip that scenario and you say, well, if tomorrow all women disappeared except for one, how long would it take to repopulate the earth?
Mm-hmm.
And you start to see why this component works more so one way than the other. That doesn't mean that there haven't been times when women have had more than one husband. It's just not as common, and there's reasons for it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at polyandry, you look at women who've had multiple husbands, in general, as far as I've seen, what happens is it forms around famine. And generally, when famine happens, women and children are more susceptible.
Mm-hmm.
So if the women die off and there are less women, then now the men have to come together and say, okay, well, here's how we're going to handle this. We
Mm-hmm.
both want our bloodline to pass on. So we have to figure out a way around this. So it has worked both ways, but one way is more common than the other.
So I think that's very interesting. I mean, once again, I think that we do, and I'm like, me personally, like, I want to get back to studying what things happened in Africa. What was the culture? What were some of the, some of the things that we did that.
Oh, where's the remote control?
Go look by the television, please.
No.
That we did that works, and I know a lot of people say, oh, well, that was back in the days, or that wasn't even on this continent, like that was in Africa. But my thing is, like, there's a lot of things that if it's not broke, don't fix it. Like, I firmly believe that, and I'm like, I think that's why we need to revisit some of the old ways in which we've done things. Now, for me personally, do I think that polygamy is one of those things that I personally could find myself? I'm not 100%. But it's funny though, because looking like, and I want to know, what do you think about how does this translate to modern day? Because yes, back then when game, like you said, big game was an issue, and men going off to war, which we still, continue to have war and the word. So I'm not saying that that's legitimately all the way out of the picture, but I think that some of these threats are different. And so would you say that this still should be applicable with the modern day threats that we have to the family?
Yes, I still think it's applicable. And here's one thing: when you say that, people do talk about, well, old things don't exist, but these same people who will say that, oh, we don't have these issues, we don't have those problems, we're modern, these are the same people who will say there's things that have gone wrong in these generations, right, in these later generations. But if you're saying that there's an issue with these later generations, and at the same time you're saying that we need to leave the past alone, then your speech is now incongruent, right? So probably the reason that there are issues with some of these generations is because they've become so far removed from the past. Now, just that as a qualification. Yes, there are still things going on that keep us, and I'm not talking about all people, right? So right now I'm just discussing Black people.
Right.
So 1/3 of Black men are caught up in the prison system, right? They're either behind bars on probation, or got a bracelet on. You know what I'm saying? So somehow is 1/3 of us literally in that system. So what do you do with all of the families of these people?
Right.
When you think about it like that, you see what I'm saying? So no, we're not going out and getting picked off by a lion somewhere. You know what I mean? But there is still a situation where the system of polygamy is applicable, and it's it's a way to actually bring the community together if people wouldn't think in an individualistic manner. So if you just think about some people have multiple baby mamas. Like, we have the same issues everywhere we are, right? We all see these same stories.
I'm
But
glad you
my
got to say
issue,
this is what I want you to do, because I was just going to ask you, like, how is it applied? Because we want to look at it from a modern day context, and of course, I think that's the most congruent thing, is to look at quote unquote babies' mothers and babies' fathers, that situation, and how this could be applicable in modern times. So go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't cut you off, but
oh, no problem, no problem. So one is, if you look at how many women that you've seen who actually fight over, if they'll fight each other over this man, you know what I'm saying? As opposed to saying, hey, let's work together for the betterment of the children.
right.
So that was one of the first things that started me to asking these questions. Why can't these women come together? Instead of, I know this guy he ain't worth nothing, you know what I'm saying? But y'all are fighting over him instead of coming together, right? So if women could come together in that way, and then there's men out here who are willing to take care of more than one family, who are in a position to do so properly, then why should that be an issue? Because you're essentially in the same situation, right? I mean, there's so many people who are in these. We know about all of these so-called situationships. We know about, so it's occurring anyways. So why not put it into a system that actually works for the betterment of the community? And I think what interferes with that a lot of time is the Western world, an individualistic attitude, and a lot of times religion. But the religion is taught to us improperly. So I don't have necessarily a big issue with religion. I grew up Christian. At one point, I was a part of a student ministry, and I taught Bible study. You know what I'm saying? But I ended up studying my way out of the Bible. But if you were to learn things in a proper context, I don't think these things would be much of an issue. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm saying all men need to have more than one wife, because most men aren't capable of it. You know what I'm saying? Financially, they're not capable of it. Emotionally, we still have some of these same issues. And even though we talk about, see, a lot of people talk about, oh, our ancestors did this and our ancestors did that. Yes, that is true. They did, but it was not the standard. So every man didn't have multiple wives. Not every man wanted multiple wives. And that's the thing. You have to separate them then and us now. We're over-sexualized, or hypersexualized rather, and they didn't think in those same terms. And if you want to understand how that kind of works, then you can look at, smaller, like, tribal people, or you can look at the Himba women in Mali, right? Though they're like, they say those are the most beautiful women in the world. I would agree with that. But these women walk around with no top on, right? But they're not being harassed. They're not being groped. They're not being catcalled. They're not raped and things like that. So that's just to show you that temperament that we had then is still existent in some places that haven't really been completely taken over, that haven't been completely colonized. So you have to kind of take that into consideration when you look at the difference of that thought process versus ours now. So you have a lot of people who are trying to sell women on this idea of multiple wives, but they're doing it strictly from a sexual standpoint, and that is not what it's about. I have a friend who recently was telling me about a guy that was trying to bring her into his relationship, and he from everything she was telling me, he tends to keep about 3 women, but he's rotating one of them in and out because somebody gets tired and leaves. And mainly the reason is this dude he has 2 jobs. So I'm not talking about anybody who has to work 2 jobs. I've worked more than that. I worked 2 jobs in high school. You know what I'm saying? But he's a grown man in his 30s working 2 call center jobs. You know what I'm saying? That doesn't even sound like somebody who should be focusing on more than one woman. You see what I'm saying? But he's doing it. So we have to sit back and just take all of these things into account. Who is able? It's got to be an ethical system, right? Who is able to handle multiple women, and why should you be able to be with more than one woman? Why would you want to be with more than one woman and they be in the same house? Can you provide for 2 women who are in different? Because we're talking about multiple families. You know what I'm saying? These women shouldn't be forced to be in the same house. So if you can't handle that part, then you shouldn't be moving on. You shouldn't even be thinking about it, right? And then the way I was taught by Professor James Small is, and he's a priest. He's a Yoruba priest of Yemoya in Ghana. And the way they do it there is still traditional in the village and the system that he's a part of. So before you get married at all, even to a first wife, you have to go to the elders. So I've always been a fan of eldership and a system of elders. And I've been working on an idea myself for a council of elders. But yeah, so the elders actually match you to somebody, usually, you know what I'm saying? So our ideas of even love a lot of times are off because we think of, a love is a feeling. I need to be in love with somebody. I need to be. And if you look at it, you'll see that our marriages last far shorter than a lot of arranged marriages because we aren't paired and we focus on a feeling. So I'm definitely big on the eldership. And there's something that Umar Johnson said that really, really interests me, which was about men who, even when a woman agrees with polygamy, to be in a polygamous relationship, a lot of them want the same things from women. So they all want the woman that is like the most beautiful woman. They all want the woman who doesn't have children of her own. They all want, all of these things. And it's like, no, you can't take that same woman, with those same qualities off the market for everybody. So he also spoke about, okay, if you have your first wife is a woman who's, probably she could be like, say, a model, right? Gorgeous. Maybe doesn't have a child at all. Okay, so the next woman, because this is about community building, you're going to take a woman who looks good, probably doesn't look as good, and has children, 2 or 3, and if you go for a third one, then and it's not actually, I don't want people to think about it like you're downgrading.
Because I'm like, that's what.
But because and see, that's the vanity that kicks in when people start thinking like that, because they're not thinking from a community building aspect, right? Because number one, looks aren't the most incredible thing in the world, right? And we all know that, because I think all of us have been with somebody that we thought was like probably the best looking person around, or one of the best, and found out the hard way that, this ain't what I thought it would be.
But I think, I understand about taking on different types of women. Like, I mean, you mentioned the vanity part, so I think that's how people jump on that first. And that's why I was like, that's interesting. But I do see where you're coming from. I mean, I would say, if anything, it should be, you look at the values of what you want to have in your family. Like, maybe you get a woman that's good with finances. And
right,
then you get another woman that, you know what I'm saying, that's good with cooking and nutrition, and then another woman that, you know what I mean? So you have to, if you want to talk about strengthening, maybe look at the strengths of what you want to have in your family as opposed to the vanity position of it. Um, and that I could understand. I want to go back to what you were talking about because I think that a lot of us are living, and I hear this all the time, that we're living a polygamy type of, lifestyle already, sharing, basically essentially sharing men and stuff
True.
of that nature. And so I can see why people are like, well, we already doing that. I think a lot of people, and I'll just be honest, I think a lot of people try to mind F you, into some of these situations and say, oh, well, it's only but so many women to a man. And so you might as well have a husband and share him and do, and I'm just like, the numbers have always been unequal. And I want to, in the time, the numbers have been unequal. So
Right.
I think that, depending on who's doing this talking, basically, you got to be real careful with people's intentions. I'll be honest, I think most of the people who are involved in it, the intentions are not pure. The intentions are definitely not to build community. The intentions are, as I said to you earlier, is to have your cake and eat it too. Just to have multiple women, and it's been an over-sexualized kind of thing. I'm curious to know when it comes to even when they were doing this or when they do this in Africa. So they're taking care of multiple households. So you're saying that the families don't all live together in one dwelling? Everybody's separate?
No, they live separate. That's not always the case, but in general it is.
Okay.
In general it is. I mean, but you have some people who have more. So if I'm, it's the difference in whether I'm in a house or a palace, right? If I'm in a palace, then I can have multiple women in the same. Like Mansa Musa had, I think, 200 wives, if I'm not mistaken. You know what I'm saying? But Mansa Musa was the king. Like versus somebody else who has multiple wives, 2 or 3. I can't live the same way as him. These women could be in the same house basically and not see each other. So yeah, you need to be. That's why I say you got to be able to take care of multiple households, because in general, these women, yet they commune together, but they care for their families, both together and separately. So, something that. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that I could rock out with some of the principles. I mean, me personally, I have 2 children. And the one thing that I would say that my children's father did was that he kept me and because he had a son when I met him, who was like 1 year old. So that, they had their family, and then me and him, we got together, and then eventually we had our family. And the one thing that I will say that he never separate enough so that we never had any issues with each other. And so now to present day, me and his son's mother I consider her to be a sister to me. Like, we're really, really good friends. And a lot of times people are like, yo, like how we out, like, how does that work? Like, because it's not, I don't know how common it is, to be quite honest. I've not looked at this, but I've heard enough comments that it seems like it's not as common as I believe that it should be. That if you have 2 women and you have 2, children with both these women, we should be in connection with each other. The kids should know each other. You know what I mean? Like, there's been times when, like, his son's mother, she babysat my son for me. We go to church together currently. Our kids are all around together. We do things together. We take trips together. She got remarried. We were doing double dates together, stuff like that. And so I think that some of these things, even if you take out the bits and pieces that you feel like are applicable to your own life, I think we need to be doing these kind of things. I think that it's important that, yes, if we're looking at the grand scheme of things, the women should not have a problem with each other if we both have the same kid's father, the same, I hate baby's daddy, but baby's daddy or whatever.
Right.
A certain amount of communal that has to happen. Like, we have children in common. This has to happen. And I think that, like you said, some of these things are happening anyway, where you are. Now, I'll be honest, for me personally, I might have to rewrap my brain or reshape my thinking about how I'm thinking. But in my mind, I'm like, and I said this to you, I'm not, I'm very caring, very sharing. But when it comes to sharing a man, like, I'm not I don't just see myself willingly signing up for something like that. Is it a matter of maybe retraining how you're thinking about the situation? I think so. Maybe even a matter of making sure that you have the right man involved in that situation, where it's not going to be that he's just, tiptoeing from one bed to the next bed, because these are the images that we have that at least I know I have in my mind, and I'm sure other people would agree. In my mind, this is what happened. You know what I mean? Where you have multiple wives, and it's kind of like you're sharing this one man, and just human nature is that somebody's gonna more than likely become jealous. Somebody's gonna have a problem. Somebody might feel like somebody's getting more time than the other, or he's, you said getting the wife that had the 3 wives and they all look different, and maybe the wife that he seems to be spending the most attention with is the one that's going to be envied and, looked at or as problematic. And so you have these breakdowns that are going to happen. And so I definitely think that some of it is reshaping how we think about some of the things, but I also think some of it is just the reality of what we're in, and knowing who it is that we're dealing with and what the real intention is. Is the intent that this man just wants a harem of women, you know what I mean, to just sleep with at will and be all over the place? Or is the intention real, true communal building? And then are you guys really doing that?
Right. I think ways to quell that issue is definitely, like I said, having a council of elders.
Right.
Because if there are these issues that begin to arise, a woman would be able to, or whoever, the man or the woman, but generally it'll be the woman first, right, to go to the elders and say, here's what's going on, and here's what I need help with. And then the elders call to order this man. So once you call him to order, he has to sit before the council and explain himself. And the elders say what's going to happen next. You know what I'm saying? And these are real things that this is systematic that I've gotten from the elders. I'm not just making this up on the fly.
Oh no, I know.
So, but they will decide whether you can even stay with that woman or not. So if you're not holding up your end of the bargain, then they're going to split you and find someone else for a woman to be with. You know what I mean? But also there needs to be basic rules in place. So there are basic rules in place as well. So it's not just you figure out who you want to go and be with on what day. In generally the women split days, right? Certain days are with one woman, certain days are with another woman. Who would decide that? Not the man. The women decide that. You know what I'm saying? And the same way with a man being with multiple wives. Like once you find a wife, you don't generally go out and find another wife, because just because you feel like someone is good for you, because let's face it, men basically function first on physical, right? First on physical. That's nature. So we can't just go out there and say, oh, she's beautiful, I like the way she treats me, here you go, here's another woman, now we're a family. It's the woman who goes out and finds another woman, because she knows what her man likes, one, and she knows what'll be good for building the family, two. You know what I'm saying? So you have to have these kind of rules and these kind of ideas in place before you even get started.
I mean, I think that if clearly, if you have people that are of the same like mind and they're on the same page and moving in one accord, then they could definitely work. And I think that's with all things.
Right.
But I just, I feel like, some of the things that we've gotten away from that were culturally relevant, we don't even have a full understanding about. So I just appreciate you for just even coming on here and explaining and giving us some of the cultural and historical context behind some of this stuff. Because I'll be honest, if you look at social media, if you look at, some of these things like sister wives and stuff, and it's like, yo, what in the... I'm not signing up for no crap like that, like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, but then when you really think about some of the things, I mean, if some of these things are things that we're already participating in, then it's all right, it might be a little bit more amenable to some of us. But I'm gonna be honest, I'm still like, yeah, I don't want to share. I'm sorry. I'm just gonna put it out there. I'm not sharing my husband. Like, I'm not doing it. But I will share, certain things. Like, if he has children, like, those children become our children, and we take care of the family. And there's no me sitting back and watching you be a deadbeat, to my kid, somebody else's kids, but you're not to our kids or anything like that. Like, and I think even just taking on some of that stuff, I just think we need to just get more of the communal mindset, you know what I mean? Like, amongst ourselves, amongst the women, amongst ourselves, amongst the men, amongst ourselves, and between the both of us. And I want to talk some more about the whole council of elders, because I really believe in having people that you can go to for things like this. People who have been through life and they can lend wisdom to us. Like, I feel like that's something that's really missing. And some of us have that. Some of us have elders, that we can go to and ask certain questions of and get advice from. But I think that's one of the things that seems to be lacking for us as a people currently. And so I love the fact that you say you have an idea with something like that. I've been thinking about, even when it comes to the dating group, one of the things that I had asked fairly early on was if people were okay with having married couples in the group, because I wanted them to be like mentor elders to our singles and to our daters. To me, it's no different getting a mentor for a job, right? Like, if there's a profession that you want to go into, you might want to do an apprenticeship. You might want to have a mentor, somebody that's been through it, to show you the ropes and how to be successful in what it is that you want to do. And so I think relationships are no different. And so I think you need to have that. I mean, and clearly life is no different. Like, you need to have some semblance of a place where you can go to get some guidance.
Right. We have it to some extent. You can see it within the church. You know what I'm saying? So there are things. Our culture is very well preserved, but it's just in tatters. It's all over the place, and we haven't been trained how to recognize, what is still our culture. So you definitely see like a council of elders within the church, because these are the people that you generally go to for advice. It's just not set up in an organized fashion. But my idea is that one, I've talked before about organizations, right? And there are organizations everywhere. So what I was thinking about was trying to link with, the different organizations. I would start in the city that wherever I touch down at, as my final destination, which is likely going to be Jacksonville, Florida. That's where I'm from. So, and that's where I'm trying to get back to. But you work with the organizations, and you have these organizations form basically a council of elders within them, right? And out of that council, they should always have one man and one woman who are like the senior elders, right? Who would be the ones that communicate back and forth between the different organizations, right? And they would also formulate, if you take the senior man and woman out of each organization and you put them together, then that kind of formulates like a grand council that governs the smaller bodies of organizations up under them. You know what I'm saying? And then from those organizations, they kind of govern the members. So there's a hierarchy to it. And that even comes from like the ancient priesthoods, right? So if you look at the way that we were able to preserve our spiritual systems so that they didn't get confused and didn't get just taught by anybody, there was a hierarchy in the priesthood, similar to the Catholic Church, because you can see some of the semblance in the Catholic Church versus Egypt. It's in their symbolisms, it's in their clothing. You just have to know what you're looking at. So they've stolen so much from us directly, but they've gotten it wrong. So and a lot of times when I say Egypt, people, I know we think of Egypt as like the greatest of us. It was the height of us, but Ethiopia is older than Egypt, right? So Ethiopian culture, even the language, we say the language was created in Egypt. It was finished in Egypt, but it came out of Ethiopia. So I just make Egypt a reference so you understand how it goes from, Africa into the West. It came through the Catholic Church. But in Ethiopia is where you first see this hierarchy, which the priests speak different languages. So you have on the first level, you have priests who mainly communicate with the general public, and they can speak to the public the language of the people, and then they can speak. Some of them can speak with like that second level of priests, but that second level of priests, all of them know their language, but not everybody below them does, right? And then you have that tertiary level of priests who speak a language that almost none of the others know, but like they can speak to the middle, like that middle level of priests. So they keep the information flow that way. And the reason they have the languages that are different is because that word cannot be just changed and spoken to anybody any kind of way. You know what I mean? Which is why when you look at older spiritual systems, they're more preserved and still relevant today when you look at them, because they did actually change over time, but they change ethically and accordingly, as opposed to a rigid religion. The Abrahamic religions are very rigid, right? They don't change over time. However, because everybody reads them, everybody can speak the language of them, everybody is allowed to preach, then you have you have over 300 different sects of Christianity, over 100 of Islam, and I don't know how many of Judaism, but I mean, you can see there's a difference in, you have Sephardic Jews, you have the Israeli Jews, the Falasha Jews, and then you go into like Hebrews, and you look and you see, you in New York, so I know you see all the different Hebrew camps. You know what I'm saying? And they don't all think alike, because everybody's allowed to take and interpret this stuff the way they want to. So that's the difference. Like these religions now, they're rigid, they don't change. Our spiritual systems changed, but they were preserved because not anybody can go out and preach and teach. Whereas, in the West, anybody can preach and teach. I mean, they take our stuff, but because they're so backwards as a people, they've gotten it wrong because they're young. They're essentially children, right? They're young. We're an older, more calm, cool people. We've been around a long time, so we think differently. But yeah, so in all of these things, I kind of try to put, new ideas with older ideas. One of the things that John Henry Clarke always talked about was that one of the main reasons we don't get anywhere is because with every generation, we're trying to recreate the wheel. He's like, why don't you read? He's like, not only do you not read enough, you don't read nearly enough. The message has already been left behind. The plan has already been left behind. The idea that any of us think that we're as smart as a Du Bois is insane. It's insane. These people have left behind what needs to happen. You had Paul Cuffey in the 1800s say, yo, we're not going to get anywhere unless we take care of ourselves. You have David Walker, who comes in the later 1800s. I think Paul Cuffey was 1700s, if I'm not mistaken. And then David Walker was like later 1800s saying the same thing. Then you had Du Bois, who was actually an advocate for integration early on in his life. And then later on, he says, we're not going to get anywhere unless we take care of ourselves. You know what I'm saying? So it's the same message. And you have people now who are saying, we can't depend on white people. They're not truly our allies. We can't, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
we have to look and understand what has existed before. Because
That's why I think
everybody's
history is so important, yo. Like, I keep telling people, like, just for the simple fact that history repeats itself, that's why it's so important to look at it. And the reason why it repeats, I feel like, is because we're not learning certain things that we need to learn and redoing certain things. And even keeping with we need to keep up with. You got to look at, like you said, about the broke wheel. Like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Why are we not examining it work for us? You know, and I was just having this conversation the other day with somebody, and you know, people might feel a certain type of way about this, but I said I feel like when we existed more in a separatist world frame, for us, things work better. And honestly, I would love to see us to get back to that. And you know, we've been trying to work on integrating ourselves with them, but it's like, why? What purpose does it serve at this point in time? Like, if you look at history, it has not served us.
Right.
When we built our own communities, when we did our own thing, when we had our own stores and our own doctors and our own finances, like, we have to get back to some of these things, like I said, that work, and look at the things that work. Look at history and see what things work, and maybe what things we can even just improve on, because some things do have to evolve, and I understand that. But some of the basics, and sometimes it's not even some grand, you know, I feel like sometimes we go to the grand things, the grand gestures, and think that these are where the answers are. And sometimes it's slightest of things. It could be a small tweak, and taking on a different mindset and making, and it really works. But we need to have these conversations and these discussions, but we also need to have some more action too. And I think that's where we continually fall. But the answer is in the history. Like, a lot of the answers in our history.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's why I'm like, I think it's important that we get a historical context behind what's happening. When do we see things working? When do we see things that we even this, and what would be like the modern day equivalent to that? So now how can you reshape? You know, maybe, you know, when it comes to polygamy, if we're looking at polygamy from, you know, the historical concept of how it works, and then how can you apply some of those same principles to modern day?
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, so it might not be that it's just, you know, that this is your polygamous husband, or whatever. It's, you know, it's your children's father, and you know, we have multiple ones, and he's taking care of the households as he should. You know what I mean? And the women are building as we should. And we all, and not to say it's separate, I'm just saying that we all have roles that we have to play.
Right. Absolutely.
You know? So yeah.
And I do want to say this one last thing is that another thing that made me start thinking like this too, or, you know, looking deeper into it, is because I have a cousin who has 6 children with one woman. But he didn't take care of them. So, and he went to jail for shit. He just got out after, I think he was in there 8 years this time. You know what I'm saying? But what does that woman have left? This woman is just now entering her 30s with 6 children. You know what I'm saying? So what, should she be alone forever? Should she accept just a man that wants to come through and you know, spend that little bit of quality time with her and then go? You know, she should be able to be in a family environment as well. And that's just the case that I'm close to, but I know that exists out here, you know, all over the place. So, you know, what do these women have left, and why should they be, you know, left out in the wild by themselves, in the wilderness rather?
Guys, so this is part 2 of our discussion with Gulley Grand about polygamy and other items. So forgive me, guys. I feel like I always put out this disclaimer about me and technology. Like, I'm here, you guys, some might know my backstory, but I'm a single mom. I'm here homeschooling, and I got one kid crying over toys and one kid on the video game acting like he's, fighting for his life apparently. So I was distracted and did not realize that my phone was about to die, in which that's what happened. So forgive me, Gulley, for interrupting the conversation, because it's been a great conversation. But I want us to jump back into it. You were talking about your cousin and the situation that was at hand with your cousin. So let's just jump right back into it.
Yeah. So my cousin he has 6 children with one woman. He has other children out there now, but he has 6 with one woman. And my thing was that this woman is now, let's see, I'm 37. That makes her 33, 32, 33 with 6 children. Wow. So you begin to think about, like, what are her prospects out here? Most people are not going to want to take that on. Right. You know what I'm saying? Not as that being, my only wife. But if there was a system in place, then she could easily be like the 3rd or 4th wife. And that goes back to earlier what I was saying, how Umar Johnson broke it down, about subsequent wives. You can't have each wife that doesn't have a child, because it's community building, right? So this woman with the 6 children, by the time she comes in, you already have a wife that you started with. The first one, the second one, who's, maybe not doing as well, but you got a woman with 6 children, and due to being able to keep a job, she's probably working somewhere, a dollar store or something like that. You know what I mean? So that's why it's always supposed to be about community building. That's the aspect we have to look in it, or look at it as, where does that woman stand? Where do those children stand?
Now, for people who would say, because, I definitely believe in communal building. I mean, even in my current life, like, I have, a handful of women that I know that I'm really close with. I don't have a lot of friends, but, I have a handful of friends, women that I'm close with. And the majority are single mothers. Or
right.
They are moms with multiple children. And so I see where, the communal aspect of a lot of this comes into play. And it's necessary. Like, even I've been thinking about doing a car share for single moms, where we have like a communal car. Because not everybody can afford a car, but we clearly, as moms, a lot of times we have errands to run. We have to take our children to places, appointments, and go food shopping, lunch, all these things. And so even just having access to a car that everybody could share together, you kind of schedule it out and everybody's able to kind of do their things. Or, having a group of trusted women that could babysit kids for certain things. You know what I mean?
There you go.
Of women. And these are things that I talk about a lot with my girlfriends. And we're probably going to set up some of these things, because I think it's really important that we do this. And so, because just the truth of the matter is, for a lot of us, having the men in the situation is not even a reality right now. You know what I mean? Right. And so outside of polygamy, I think that we do need to be thinking more communally how we can help each other. If you have that neighbor who, is like your cousin who has 6 kids, and she might need, we get overwhelmed. Like, even like right now, like 2 kids, I'm like off out of earshot of audio, like, if you don't go sit down, like,
right.
To give you a respite break, you know what I'm saying? To give you the opportunity to just walk downstairs and get some air is what we need to be doing for each other. And that away from anybody, if anything, it just builds us up further. It builds up community, a sense of community and sisterhood and brotherhood. I think a lot of these things are just missing. And even when it comes to the men, like, things like having that council of elders, I just feel like a lot of times we don't have people to check in with. We don't have people that are checking us.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that I feel personally is missing. When I talk to people that are in the group, men, and they talk about, a lot of this talk about single moms and how, we it's almost like, as a single mother, now you got these people like freaking Kevin Samuels that have a whole rating system, like dings scores off your, like takes points off your score, quote unquote, because you have a certain amount of kids. Every kid that you have is a point off of you. And it's just like, why are we doing these things? Like, having kids is an honor. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Absolutely.
Culture, having kids is an absolute honor. It's not looked and frowned upon. You know what I mean? Family was an honorable thing to have and to do. We've gotten away from some things that were just tradition and commonplace, that now, like, the things that are more traditional seem like weird to people, seem unorthodox. And it's like, but this is how it used to be.
Right.
How are we not getting back into these things? And I think it's just really important that we have these talks, that we have these understandings, and even for the people that are underneath us, the younger generation, for them to understand. Because, at the end of the day, they're going to go on and they're going to be progeny in the race and progeny families and culture and history. And if we continue like how it is right now, like, we're not going to a good place. We're already not in a good place. But to even think even further ahead, we're just going to continually not be in a good place. And it's not good. I think that we have to have these things. And I want to talk to you more about doing this council of elders, even if it's just a matter of having, a small council of elders that we can go to for daily things. Like, I think it's just really, really important.
Absolutely. I'm definitely down to sit and talk and plan and work on things, put it into action, because we can talk and talk and talk, but we gotta start trying to put things into action.
I know. I be saying all the time, I'm tired of talking. I be tired of listening to my own voice. I just like, can we just do something, please? Can we just get something going? But sometimes you got to be the one that's speaking about it, got to be the one to put it into action. And so,
absolutely,
myself to do some of that stuff. I mean, I think this group has been one of those things where it's like, I saw something, we saw something, and we were like, all right, what can we do to combat some of this? And I feel like our group has done a really good job of combating some of the stuff that we were trying to, but clearly we still have a lot of work to do. So in that vein, I want to say that I appreciate you being in the group. I appreciate your input. I appreciate this conversation. I think it's really important. And I think that I'm going to put this out there, but I want this to be the beginning of conversation, even with this topic. Like, I think some topics we kind of shy away from because you feel like, oh, it's going to be a hot button thing and, people are going to be popping off and all of this. But I'm like, even if that's the case, we still need to talk about it. We need to we need to understand it, and we need not to shy away from it. So let's have these conversations because they're important.
I agree 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm definitely I'm willing to participate. I love the group, so I love the fellowship that comes along with it. I love the new ideas, even, and these hot button topics. The pushback causes you to think deeper, and sometimes I have to go back and I have to go seek an answer from somebody, or I have to go and research myself, which is beautiful because that is still promoting more growth. So shying away from these topics is not something that I'm willing to do. Right. I go into everything head forward. I'm that kind of a person, right? I throw caution in the wind and I go, if it's something that I mess up on, I'm just like, whoops, shouldn't have done that. But I won't know it until afterwards because I'm always willing to.
Right. But I'm like, that's how we need to be. Like, I feel like, a lot of the information that we have now, I mean, honestly, there's not a whole lot of excuses that we have with not getting information. It's like all this information that's being thrown and swirled around, a lot of it is misinformation. And a lot of us just readily eat it, and don't think about the source or where it comes from, or even the intent of the person that put it out. Like, I don't want to hear about these numbers of how many Black single mothers there are, from certain groups of people, and how many people are not getting married, and how many, it's like we have to look at intentions a lot of times. And I feel like if you really look at the intent with a lot of things, even when it comes to, this virus, and that's a whole nother conversation, but it's like we got to think about who this information is coming from and what is their intent. And I feel like a lot of times we need to be thinking about a lot of different things in that same vein, because I think that we too readily just accept what we hear, what we see, and don't delve in further. And I think that's part of our mistake that we make as a people, and that's part of our problem that we have right now, that we just get a lot of this information, but some of it is not factual, some of it is not coming from a good place. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it's not a good thing. We have to do a better job of understanding ourselves and moving forward, So yeah, so I appreciate you for being on here. But this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning of these talks, and I'm ready, and I know you're ready.
Absolutely, I appreciate it.
I appreciate you too, and I appreciate you guys for listening to me and Gulley's talk on dating better. I appreciate you guys for being in the group, and for those of you who are not in the group, I just appreciate the listen. I hope that this brought some information to you. I hope that you were able to get something out of this conversation, something that enlightened you, something that gave you some more understanding, something that opened your mind up a little bit more, because that's part of the intent of these conversations. And so I thank you guys for all being here and for listening. Until the next time, talk to you soon. Be well, guys.